Good morning. So good to have you here today. Welcome to First Baptist Church of King. We are so happy that you've chosen to worship with us here today. And as we gather here today, this morning, we continue our sermon series, The Age of Heroes. If you've not been here up till now, I want to catch you up just a bit. The Age of Heroes is a sermon series about comparing the traits and qualities of comic book heroes with the traits and qualities of God's heroes. You know, in our very first week, we talked about the strengths of heroes and how God calls all of his heroes to do super things with their lives, things such as stand for truth and fight for justice and just make their communities a better place to live. And we can do that when we rely on his strength and his power. Using the example of Jeremiah, we talked about how Jeremiah was called up by the Lord and how we all have a calling from God. The second week, we talked about the weakness of heroes and how all of God's heroes have weaknesses. We have those things that tempt us, those things that try to trip us up, and how we can really stay vigilant against those things. And as we do, we are more equipped and more able to do the things that God has called us to do. This morning, we switched gears just a little bit. We talked about the mission field of superheroes. You know, if you look in the comic books, you will find that every hero in the comic books, they not only have a place to live and a place to call home, they have a primary place to serve. Have you ever noticed this? It's really kind of bizarre when you think about it. For instance, Superman. Here, you have this man of steel. He has a cape. He can fly. He can go to all parts of the world. He can fly into outer space. But most of the time, when you see Superman, he's primarily where? In Metropolis. That's his place of service. Hey, Batman's the same way. Batman, he has a fast car, he has a jet, he has a helicopter, and every other gadget imaginable to take him to the far reaches of the globe, but most of the time, when you look in the comics, where is he at? He's at Gotham City. That's his mission field. That's the place where he primarily serves. Flash is another example. You know, the Flash, touted in the comics, he's the fastest man alive. He has supersonic speed. I mean, he's got so much speed, he can run across the ocean. He can be to Europe or Asia or Africa in just a matter of minutes. But when you look in the comics, where does he primarily serve? Central City. That's the place where he's been called to serve. Well, you know, when you come to these comic book heroes, you will notice something very interesting. It's not just about where they serve that is so interesting. It's also about who they serve. Have you ever noticed in the comics that all of the heroes, they're loved, they're respected, they're adored by their adoring public? These heroes can do no wrong. Adults want to be like them. Kids want to dress up and act like them. You know, these heroes, it just seems like they get perks and privileges that ordinary people do not get. You know, for instance, we're always finding in the comics that these heroes, they're always getting awards and accolades and keys to the city. You know, they're getting days named after them. Also in the comics, you will notice that heroes seem to have privileges and freedom that ordinary people do not have. Heroes can go into the police commissioner's office, for instance, and tell the police commissioner how to do his job, and he complies. While these heroes seem to have this idealized life where everyone follows their lead and they can do no wrong, God's heroes, well, we don't fare that well, do we? You know, God's heroes, we are called to a mission field. God has a place of service for each and every one of us. However, more often than not, we find that when God calls a person to a place of service, a lot of times they don't receive praise. They receive persecution. A lot of times God's heroes, when they're called to a mission field, they don't get a lot of glory, but they do get a lot of grumbling from the very people that they want to serve. You know, I think one reason for that is because sometimes God calls his servants to places where hearts are so dark. You know, people's lives are so lost that sometimes the people that they serve don't even realize that they're lost and needing saving. You know, not at first. I guess that's why we can call them God's heroes, because that's what a hero does. Goes into a place where people need rescuing, and regardless the cost, they put their lives on the line so that people can get the salvation that they're looking for. Sometimes God's heroes don't get the praise that we deserve. Sometimes we don't get the rewards, not in this lifetime, but regardless, God sees what his heroes are doing, and he will reward them in his own time. We get a great illustration of this, folks, in the passage that we're looking at today. It's the story of Moses. Now, by the time we get to Exodus chapter 17, God has called on Moses to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt and into the wilderness as they make their way to the promised land. And up to this point, they've seen God do some amazing things. I mean, God has parted the Red Sea and allowed the people to cross over on dry land. Meanwhile, he crushed the mighty army of Pharaoh. The people have seen God do other miraculous, amazing things as well. But they get to a place called Rephidim. And at Rephidim, the people grow impatient for water. I mean, they get really hostile toward God's leader. I mean, there's even talk of stoning Moses. I mean, they are turning on Moses because they're so upset, so impatient, and they want water, and they want it right now. Moses doesn't know what to do. So he does the right thing. He goes to his power source, the source of his strength. He says, God, what am I to do with these people? And folks, that is something utterly amazing. Happens not only for Moses, but for the people of Israel. Listen, today, if you're struggling on your mission field, that place where God has called you to serve him, whether that place is an office complex, whether it's a warehouse, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a ball field, or whether it's simply at home, and the people that you've been called to serve, they're giving you a difficult time, and you're at a point where you just don't know what to do. You're at your wit's end, and you're starting to question God, and you're saying, God, you see this dilemma that I'm in, and I don't know what I'm going to do. God, are you there? Folks, we're going to learn something very fascinating today, because what God does for Moses, he does for any person that he calls to his mission. I hope that today's passage will be encouragement to you, because we find here that just as God serves Moses on his mission field, he serves us as well. I'm going to ask you would to go ahead and turn to that passage. It's Exodus chapter 17, and we're just going to look at the first 7 verses. Exodus 17, verses 1 through 7. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff which you struck the Nile, and go. Now I'll stand there before you by the rock of Horeb. Strike the rock, and the water will come out from it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us, or is he not?" Folks, what does this passage communicate to us this morning about the mission fields that we serve, as well as the people that we serve in the name of the Lord? First of all, it tells us this. Number one, the anger that people have with others is often an indicator of their dissatisfaction with God. Now, if you look around you and you look in the papers or you look on the internet, you will find something I think we can all agree with, and that is today we live in a culture that is very, very angry. I mean, have you noticed this? People are angry about all sorts of things. They're angry about politics. They're angry about the economy. They're angry about the government. I mean, they're angry about their paychecks. I mean, people are really upset today. It just seems more than ever. Matter of fact, AAA did a recent survey that found that over 80% of Americans have admitted that they actually get angry on the highway. 51% of those surveys said that at one point or another they purposely tailgated somebody. 47% said that they yelled at another driver. 45% says that they honked to show their annoyance or anger. I thought that stat would actually be a little higher. 33% said that they made angry gestures. I'll let you interpret that any way that you want to. And then how about this one? 24% tried to block another driver from changing lanes. And let me say, that's just the highway. People get angry in other places as well. And you know, while certainly anger is obvious when you see it, you experience it, the source of anger, however, is not so obvious at times. Have you ever had a coworker at work suddenly get belligerent with you? Now, suddenly this coworker, this person is upset this week. Now, generally, this is a friendly person, a person that's very amiable. But this week, this person is short-tempered, kind of nasty with you, and then you find out a little bit later that this person is having trouble with his or her marriage. Or how about at school? You run up against someone at school, and this person's a bully, and this person is just mean and always getting into trouble and always ugly to other students. And suddenly you find out a little bit later that this student doesn't really have a home life. They're getting angry with you, but the source of that anger is coming from somewhere else. Psychologists call this displaced anger. What is displaced anger? Displaced anger is when you direct your anger towards something or someone that is easy or convenient rather than the source of the anger itself. It's kind of like the story of the man that's yelled at by his boss at work. So he can't yell back at his boss, so he goes home and he yells at his wife. The wife, in turn, yells at the son. The son, in turn, goes and he kicks the dog. That's displaced anger. And folks, certainly displaced anger manifests itself in our relationship with others. We've seen it. Unfortunately, sometimes it can also manifest itself in our relationship with God. Case in point, Exodus chapter 17. Read with me again in verses 1 and 2. Listen to this. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." But listen to what Moses says here. He replies, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" Moses here, he's the divinely appointed spiritual leader of the people. He's going to Rephidim not because he knows where water is, because that's where God is sending them. But the people are angry and they're upset because there is no water. Moses calls it right. He says, "You're quarreling with me, but your real anger is against God. Why do you test the Lord as you do?" In other words, why do you put God on trial? Folks, in our culture today, there are going to be a lot of people that want to express their anger. There are a lot of people like Jonah, who when they get upset with God, they're angry at God, they tell God directly. Jonah once said, "God, I'm so angry, I'm angry enough to die." However, more often than not, we find that when people are frustrated and angry at God, they don't take their anger out on the Lord. What do they take it out on? More often than not, you find they take it out on God's servants. They take it out on the church. Today, if you are a Bible-believing Christian and you are doing your best to live your life by the law of God, and you make your faith public, at some point or another, you will be discriminated against or you will be persecuted. Sometimes that persecution is very blatant. Sometimes it comes from people that are just anti-God. We read about these folks all the time in the media. There are atheist organizations. They want to take God out of the schools. They want to take God out of the public sector. They make it no secret. They have no use for God. They have no use for His Word. They have no use for His church. There are certain people that type of person where we just don't like God. However, you find other people that are angry, not because they're necessarily anti-God. It's just that their hearts are so hardened and they're so spiritually blind that when a bad thing comes their way, they get frustrated at God. And they don't really know how to express that frustration. So what do? They take it out in the church. There are people, that have lost loved ones, people that they cherished, and they get so upset at that they get angry at God. God, I don't understand why you took this person away from me. Or maybe they experienced a job loss or financial loss, and because they don't understand what God's doing, they don't understand his way, they get frustrated, and it comes out as anger. Years ago, I was serving a church, and a church, a barber shop across the street from it. And about once a month, I'd walk the street, I'd get my hair cut, and I became very good friends with the barber. The barber's name was Mac. And about once a month, I'd go in, and I would, chat with Mac, and I'd get my hair cut. We became very close friends. One particular month, I went to the barber shop, and as I walked to the door, Mac yelled, "Hey, preacher, how you doing?" And at that, one of his customers stood up and said, "Well, there goes the party. I'm out of here." And he just stares a hole through me. I mean, just this hateful look, and he walked out of the store without even getting his hair cut. I looked at Mac and I said, "Was it something I said?" Mac laughed and says, "Tom, don't worry about that guy. He just has issues." Here's a guy that I've never met before in my life. He doesn't know me from Adam, but yet the side of me, he gets really, really angry. Was he angry at me? No. He was angry at the one that I represented. His issue was not with me. His issue was with God. Folks, what do you do when you face that type of discrimination in your life? When you're trying to serve God, yet despite your best efforts and despite as friendly as you are and as Christ-like you try to be, you still have people that oppose you. How do you handle that? Well, that really leads us to our next point, simply this. We gain confidence as we remember who God is and that which he can do. There's a direct contrast here between the way that Moses handles this crisis of water and the way that people handle the crisis of water. While the people want to gossip and gripe, complain, and get angry, Moses takes the problem directly to the Lord. In verse 4, then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." The people here basically have three grievances against God. Grievance number one, they questioned God's provision. In verse 2, they said, "Give us water to drink." They don't ask for it. They don't wait for it. They insist on it. The implication here is, God, you better give us what we demand or there's no telling what we're going to do. Here they're kind of treating God like Burger King. They want to have it their way. It's their way or it's the highway. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone that demanded God do something? Years ago when I was a youth pastor, I counseled this young lady, and she was getting ready to graduate out of high school. And we were at youth camp, and she kind of took me by the side, and she just poured her heart out to me how, she was trying to discern God's will for her life. She was trying to discern what college to go to, and we talked for a good 45 minutes. When we came to the end of our conversation, I told the young lady, I said, "Well, you've shared with me your heart. Why don't we pray about this? Why don't we pray for God's direction as to what he wants you to do and what college he wants you to go to?" Very quickly, she retorted, "I don't need to pray about that. I know that I want to go to William and Mary. We've got to convince God of that. We got to figure out how God's going to get me to William and Mary." Such sentiment, folks, such a perspective. I mean, it not only reveals faithlessness, it also reveals a little bit of faithlessness. When has our plans ever been better than God's plans? C.S. Lewis once said, there are two types of people in the world today. Those people that say to God, "Thy will be done," and those people to whom God says, "All right then, have it your way." First grievance that they have against God here is that they question God's provision. But they also have this as well. The second grievance is they question God's protection. I mean, they assumed the worst about God. If you look in verse 3, they said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? To make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" In other words, they're saying, "God, are you trying to kill us out here?" Paul's words to the Romans in Romans 9:20, it would certainly apply here, where Paul says, who are you, a mere human being, to argue with God? I mean, should the thing that was created say to the one that created it, why have you made me like this? Folks, in times of personal suffering, faith over fury is the wisest path to choose. You know, here we find that they're questioning God's provision, they're questioning God's protection. Finally, their third grievance is this: they question God's presence. If you look in verse 7, is the Lord among us or is he not? In other words, Lord, have you forgotten about us? God, where are you? I mean, here we've got this dilemma here on our hands, and where have you gone to? Now, let's be honest here. We can't be too terribly hard on the Israelites, because how many times have we done this same thing in our own lives? You know, life throws us a curveball, whether it's an unexpected financial bill, or whether it's a health crisis, or whether it's a problem in our family, or with our children, or some other dilemma. Maybe it's a dilemma at work. And suddenly we go into crisis mode. We panic. You know, forget about all the things that God's done for us in the past. God, where are you now? God, if you're here, I certainly can't experience you and feel you right now. When the simple fact of the matter is, God hasn't gone anywhere. You know, the interesting thing, folks, about this passage, this is not the first time that the people have needed water. This is not the first time the people's back seemed against the wall. This is not the first crisis that the people of Israel have faced. And over and over and over again, God has shown, I am here with you, and I will provide you what you need when you need it. Think of what the people have experienced up to this point. They have seen God part the Red Sea. They have seen God destroy the mightiest army on the planet, the army of Pharaoh. If that wasn't enough, they went to a place called Marah, and the water of Marah was bitter. They couldn't drink it. So what did God do? He sweetened it. He gave them water that was undrinkable, and suddenly, miraculously, you could drink it. It was sweet. If that wasn't enough, He provided quail and manna from heaven every day so that they could eat it. He led them by a pillar of cloud during the day and a fiery cloud at night so that they could actually see at night and travel. If that wasn't enough, he made a promise to them and said, listen, if you obey me and you do the things that I asked you to do, I mean, not only am I going to provide for you, not only am I going to protect you, I'm going to make sure that you don't get the diseases that other nations receive. Folks, what else can God do to prove to them that I've got this? But in that same light, what can He do for us to show us He's got us? You know, we all have received miracles in our life. I mean, even the birth of a child is a miracle, even if you're talking about your own birth. I mean, each and every day, the sun rising and setting is a miracle. And besides that, we all have our own personal blessings. You know, one of the ways that we can gain confidence for living, one of the ways that we can gain confidence for life is just remembering some of those past blessings and then asking ourselves, can the God who gave me so much in my past, can He possibly duplicate that and give me even more for my future? Or how about this? Can the God who is willing to give up His very own Son for my salvation, can He also provide for my lesser needs as well? You know, when you put it from God's perspective and you see things from God's angle and everything that God has given us, sometimes it seems really, really silly to begin to question God. You know, we gain confidence for living when we really fully understand, folks, who God is and what He's capable of in our lives. The same God that was with you 10 years ago when you thought life was so wonderful is the same God that is with you today in the midst of your hardship. God does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. If He provided for you back then, rest assured He can provide for you today. Which really leads us to the very last point before we close. When we feel alone, we have a God who stands with us and has the power to provide. This is not the first time that the people have grumbled against God. This is, believe it or not, the fourth time people have grumbled against Moses and against God. I mean, by the time we get to Exodus chapter 17, folks, can you imagine how Moses is feeling? I mean, he's beaten up. I mean, he must feel like he is all by himself, almost as if the entire world has turned on him. But rest assured, he is not alone. You know, if you go back to verse 5, listen to what God says here. In verse 5, the Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and then go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the water out for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. Now we know from Psalm 105, Psalm 78, that when the water comes forth out of the rock, we're not talking a little trickle. We're not even talking a little stream. Those Psalms tell us it was like a raging river. I mean, suddenly this river appears before all of the people. Matter of fact, Psalms 114 says that it actually makes a pool. Now, when you hear that word pool, I'm sure you're like me. You imagine something about the size of your backyard. No, it's more like a gigantic lake that appears before the people. I mean, it would have to be in order to feed hundreds of thousands of people. But not only this, you know, think about what happens here. You know, what did this water prove? The water proved everything the people called into question. God's provision, his presence, his protection. But also it proved something else, folks. It proved God. Right there in the passage, it says, God says, "I will be with you, Moses. I will stand by you at the rock." Now, how did that happen? You know, I mean, did God appear like out of glory like people were used to seeing? Was God invisible? Was he just not able, was he invisible and people not able to see him? Some scholars actually believe that a pre-incarnate Jesus appeared at this point. But you know, it's all a moot issue, because the real issue here is that God did not leave Moses. Folks, just as God was with his servant there, he's with you, wherever God has called you to be. You know, if you find yourself in a place in life you never thought you'd be, understand, God knows you're there, and God is right there with you. You know, recently I was reading an article about Lake Tahoe in Nevada. Lake Tahoe is I think it's the 8th deepest lake in the entire world. Sonar has found that at the deepest point of Lake Tahoe, it's over 1,600 feet deep. I mean, this is a big, vast body of water. In fact, Lake Tahoe is so immense that if you tipped it over, there is enough water in that lake to cover the entire state of California in 14.5 inches of water. Lake Tahoe has enough water that it could supply every American 50 gallons of water a day for 5 straight years. Just the evaporation from Lake Tahoe in a year is enough for the city of LA 5 years worth of water. And keep in mind, there are 7 other deeper lakes in the world. What's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is this: if you have a God that can create a lake with seemingly inexhaustible water supply, an endless supply of water, what else does God possess that is inexhaustible? If he can create a lake like that, has just an endless supply of water, what kind of God are we dealing with here? Certainly we have a God that has an inexhaustible supply of his power, of his love, and of his grace. We have a God that certainly, if he can take Moses and use Moses to get water from a rock, certainly you have a God that can help you when you feel that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have a God that can do it. He's with you, and he has an immeasurable supply of power to come to your aid. You know, what's so interesting here about this passage and others in the Bible, you'll discover something interesting. In the Bible, rocks and stones are often used as a metaphor to describe God. I mean, have you seen that in the Old Testament? For instance, we find in Isaiah chapter 30, God is described as the rock of Israel. We know in Psalms 95 is the rock of our salvation. In the New Testament, we find that Jesus is described as the stones that the builders have rejected. You know, oftentimes, rocks and stones, they're used as a symbol for God. Now, that's very important because if you look in our passage in Exodus 17, you'll discover this. When the people start grumbling and complaining against God and Moses, what does God say to Moses? He says, I want you to take your staff of judgment, the rod that was used as a symbol of justice and judgment among the people, and I want you to take this staff and not strike the people, but strike the rock. What's the symbolism there? Don't strike the people. You know, it's the people that deserve to be tested, not God. It's the people that deserve judgment, not God. But he tells Moses, take that rod of justice, and I want you to strike the rock. What's the message? The message is simply this, folks. God is taking the judgment that his people deserve when the people need to be put on trial, when the people need to be tested. God says, no, don't bring judgment upon them. You bring it upon me. And of course, when the rock struck, what happens? Life comes forth in the form of water. Folks, this is not the only time we find that God will be put on judgment. And when the people need to be judged, instead, he takes judgment himself. He struck. Folks, Exodus 17 foreshadows the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. When once again we find that God's Son took the judgment that we deserved. When the people deserved to be struck, God said, no, you will strike my Son instead. He will take the judgment that the people need to have. But when Jesus dies on the cross and he takes the punishment that we deserve, what comes forth? Life. Life in the form of blood, water, symbolizing that we have forgiveness from God. Folks, Exodus 17 is a precursor to the crucifixion of Jesus. The bottom line is this. God has given us everything that he can give. And if God is willing to give up his very own Son for our salvation, certainly he will take care of lesser needs. Folks, as we wrap up today, I don't know what place of service God has called you to. But right now, you may be having a hard time. The very people that God has called you to serve, whether it's work, home, or in the classroom, you know, the place where you're supposed to be a light to the world, maybe that's the very place where you're having the hardest time. Understand this. If God sent you there and is allowing you to be there, there's a purpose for you being there. And without a doubt, you have a God that walks beside you. God hasn't gone anywhere. You know, no one said that God's callings on our life would be easy. He never once said, the place that I'm going to call you to is going to be easy street. No, a lot of times it's hard. Certainly that was the case with Moses. It was the case with Elijah. It was the case with Apostle Paul. He doesn't say it's going to be easy, but he does say this. I will be with you, and I will supply you your every need. You know, a lot of times when we have those doubts and, you know, we have those faith issues start lingering into our lives, we start asking the hard question, God, where did you go? Where are you at? What are you doing? It would be very wise for us to start thinking those past blessings that God has given us. You know, we gain confidence for living when we start thinking about who it is that we worship, what he can do. I mean, the God left you 10, 15, 20 years ago, he hasn't gone anywhere. And certainly he can continue to bless you. A lot of times he chooses not to bless us by removing the hardship, but working right through it. Certainly he does this with Moses. But understand, you have a God that goes with you. And he has an inexhaustible supply of his power, his grace, his love. Just remember this. God's throne, and he knows where you're at. The great scholar theologian A.W. Tozer once said something. I'm sure I've said this before, and I'll continue to say this. It's one of my favorite quotes. A.W. Tozer once said this. Anything God has ever done, he can do now. Anything God has ever done anywhere, he can do here. Anything God has ever done for anyone, He can certainly do for you. Put your faith in the Lord. He knows where you're at. He will supply you what you need. Pray with me if you would. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for giving us this glorious day. Lord, as we gather here today, there may have been someone that came in this morning and they're hurting. They're hurting because they're having problems at their work. Maybe they're even having problems at their home, in their marriage, or with one of their children. And Lord, they're suffering right now. Lord, maybe even today they stumbled into the door and they didn't even know why they came today, but they knew that you had called them here. Maybe it was to receive this message, Lord. But Father, if there's someone here today and they're having trouble in that place that you've called them to, I pray, Lord, that through your mighty hand and spirit, you will whisper their name and you will remind them you have not gone anywhere. You are the God of all creation. And certainly if you can make sure that the sun sets and rises and you can make sure that the world continues to rotate, you can handle any other problem that's within this world and within our little worlds. So Lord, if there's someone here today and they need to confess to you a doubt, fear, something that they're worried about, a lack of faith, that today that they will settle that matter with you so they can walk out of here with the courage and the confidence that they need to face a new day. Lord, be with us now during this time of invitation. In your name that we pray. Amen.